You are listening to the podcast for learning the language of A Course in Miracles so you can understand the meaning, embody the message, and live the teachings as a way of life. Welcome to episode 24 of this podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Jennifer McSween, creator of this podcast, and the Course in Miracles practice coach for taking those who are studying the Course from inspiration to application. The topic of this week's episode is one of the most central teachings of A Course in Miracles. Projection makes perception. And it's the foundational idea for practicing true forgiveness. Now, this central and very important teaching in the Course is also one with which most students are very familiar. Yet, it's one of the teachings we find most difficult to understand, especially as beginning course students. I know this was a real head scratcher for me in my early years as a course student. Coming from the perspective that we all do, that the world is real and that what takes place in the world affects us in a real way, that is, it affects the real us in ways we think that matter, that determine the way we feel, and even at times the choices and decisions that we make. I actually thought the Course had it backwards. I mean, me and my finite wisdom, right? I was thinking that the way we perceive or look at anything was based on our experience of or with that thing, right? And how we felt we were affected by it as a result of our encounter and our experience with it in some way. So I also used to think that projection, when the Course talked about projection, that it was referring to my reactions, again, as a result of how I felt I was affected by those encounters and experiences in the world outside me. So given that perspective, I thought the Course should have stated it in the reverse. Like I said, my finite wisdom. What I came to understand, though, was that when the Course says projection makes perception, what it is saying is that the way you see and experience anything is not because of the form in which it appears or unfolds or what it seems to do, but because of the meaning you're giving to it, the way you're looking at it within your mind and interpreting it. The way the Course sees it is, it says nothing has any meaning in and of itself. And it is we, by our interpretation, that give meaning to everything we encounter through any of the senses. The Course says this very clearly in the title of workbook lesson number 2, which is, I have given everything I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place, all the meaning that it has for me. So this means that everything we see that seems to be in a world outside us, including the world itself, is the projection of an idea in the mind. Just like the image from a reel of film that gets projected onto a movie screen. And as you know, the form or image that you see on the movie screen doesn't exist by itself. And 2, the way that we experience anything through any of the senses is based on our interpretation. That is, the meaning we're giving to it or we have given to it in our own mind. From the perspective of the Course, projection is only about what takes place in the mind that is outside of time and space, which the Course teaches is all there is, and not about what seems to take place in the world of time and space that seems to exist outside us, or what is experienced by the physical self, the I, with which we are clearly familiar and identify that we think it's the body outside us. Now, this is why we find it difficult to understand the teaching or to grasp the concept of projection as the Course talks about it. The Course's most fundamental premise is that there is no world out there. There was really only one mind, and the experiencing of the ideas in that one mind in different forms, as bodies, our own and that of other people, circumstances, events, activities that are perceived to be existing or taking place out there somewhere and not in the mind. So everything we perceive within the mind is literally projected outward in some form. Again, think of the analogy of a movie screen. There is really nothing on the screen. How you look at the form that you see projected outside you is your perception. Now, perception in and of itself is not a bad thing. It is just your interpretation, what you're telling yourself any particular form means or what it is. But you can engage in either misperception or true perception, because your perception is always coming from your identification in your mind, either with guilt, the ego, or with love, the Holy Spirit. This means that it's not what you see, but what you identify with that will determine the way you see what you see. And that will determine the nature of your perception. Every form you see will therefore be looked at either through the lens of misperception and will be perceived as an attack, or through the lens of true perception and be perceived as a call for love, depending on what you identify within your mind. A good example of this would be Jesus' perception of his crucifixion compared to that of the world's, in particular, the one that is generally held by Christianity. In chapter 6 of the text, Jesus, in narrating the course, says that he did not perceive himself as persecuted or assaulted. His perception of his crucifixion by his brothers was seen as a call for love by his brothers, not an attack. This was because Jesus always and only identified with the Holy Spirit in his mind. It is this identification that makes Jesus different from us in form only. In content, we're not different at all, because in content, we, like Jesus, are God's one Son. Jesus is different in form, or appeared different in form, because he apparently appeared to do things differently than the way we do. He appears to be different in form because he never forgot his true identity as being one with God and his true self as love, which is what God is. So he perceived or interpreted everything with love or from a perspective of love in his mind. According to the Course, what the body's eyes see, that is, anything in any form, is only a form, and that is not the basis of true perception. The concept that projection makes perception is the heartbeat of the Course's thought system, because it's the basis of the form of forgiveness the Course teaches that will lead us to recognize our true self, which will lead to the experience of miracles, peace, love, and healing, instead of misery, as long as we find ourselves in the world. Remember that forgiveness is letting go of the belief or the misperception that anything or anyone can affect you in any way. Understanding the concept projection makes perception is realizing that what seems to be and exist out there is only a projection of an idea in your mind. There is no out there, and nothing you see out there is an entity or object in and of itself. So therefore, nothing has any power to affect you in any way. And this is the starting point for practicing Course-based forgiveness, or as the Course calls it, true forgiveness, the means to miracles by recognizing the truth. Now, projection makes perception is not an easy topic to understand or a concept to grasp, particularly because we seem to be constantly confronted by what appears to be the concrete opposite, right? The good news, though, is we don't need to fully understand it, but just be willing to bring it to our awareness and be mindful of it in all our encounters and experiences in the myriad forms in which they appear. So this way, we can learn to practice responding to all our encounters and experiences with forgiveness, which is what the course aims to teach and what it wants us to learn. So that's it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Understanding the Language of A Course in Miracles. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful, please leave me a review on iTunes so that others can hear about it, enjoy it, and they might also find it helpful. And do subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Have a great week, and see you on the podcast next Wednesday.